Mike Duggan surprises no one with his destination, but just about everyone with the route he's chosen to get there. And a decade since the city's bankruptcy, a new book from the judge who guided the grand bargain. Today is Sunday, December 8th, 2024, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. A really interesting week as politics has decided not to settle down for a long winter's nap. To the surprise of absolutely no one, Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan announced this week that he will indeed be running for governor. But to the surprise of just about everyone, he announced he will be running as an independent rather than the reliable Democrat he's been his entire political career. The news buckled the knees of the political class across the state. He manages to avoid what many of us expected would be a star-studded primary on the Democratic side, but he now faces the challenges that third-party or independent candidates have always faced in trying to sit down at a table that really is built for two. We're going to talk about all that just ahead this morning. A little later on, Judge Gerald Rosen out with a new book about the grand bargain, the deal that helped move Detroit fairly quickly through the largest ever municipal bankruptcy. It certainly didn't come without cost, but it was a fairly elegant solution that few saw coming. How does it all look now, more than 10 years after the bankruptcy filing? Judge Rosen is here to talk about it, all coming up today on Flashpoint. All right, a lot to chew on today for a program like ours, thanks to Mayor Duggan's decision, which would fit right in Dan Campbell's playbook, I think. Joining me this morning are Daniel Howe, senior editor and columnist for the Detroit News. Nancy Kaffer is the editor of the editorial page at the Detroit Free Press, so that's the newspaper side of the desk. My colleague, Christy McDonald, is back with us, and so is Dennis Darnoy of Densar Consulting. Dennis, let me start with you. When this news broke of what Mike Duggan was doing, I believe what I said on our newscast that day was sometimes while everybody else is playing political checkers, Mike Duggan is playing jai-alai. I'm really curious, and now there's some brilliance to this. It is not without peril, but what were your first thoughts?
Very interesting choice. I mean, it makes a lot of sense if you look at where the Democratic Party is and how you have to navigate a primary. I naturally went back to 1998 in Minnesota, and that's when Jesse Ventura, using the Reform Party's infrastructure, won that gubernatorial race with 37%. So if Mike Duggan can create an infrastructure that allows him to run statewide, it's going to be a very interesting, 2 years to see how that happens, and a very interesting race to see if he can get it done.
Christy, we've been salivating over this really high-level primary that we thought was coming, this battle of titans on the Democratic side. He's running around it.
Oh, my gosh, it's so funny. I saw when it came through on my email, I just laughed out loud. Brought to you by the guy who did the write-in candidacy for mayor of the city of Detroit. So then I'm thinking, all right, what's the advantage here or the disadvantage? So usually when you stick with party, you have ground game, so you've got organization, and you got money. Well, we know Mike Duggan knows where to find the money. He's been able to talk to every businessman across the state. What he's been able to do as mayor for the last 12 years, as opposed to also the CEO of the DMC, and then before that with the Wayne County machine. So he knows where to find money. And then organization, he's also made it a point to go out, and when he has been working with the city, to get the best of the best to come in and work for him. So he knows how to find an organization to be able to help him in that. And, you've always seen him up at Mackinac, the policy conference. The first day of the conference at 4:30 every single year, it's his own presentation of what he's done in the city of Detroit. Absolutely, and that's statewide, and that is going to work for him in a way.
And in that money won't have to be spent in a primary.
No, he'll get to watch.
The others will be doing. Nancy, you wrote about this in the Free Press today. Talk a little bit about your take here.
Mike Duggan's brand is that he's the guy who gets things done, and I think we're all conditioned to think, oh, he knows what he's doing. So when this announcement first came out, I thought, oh, that's probably smart. And I sat with it for a while, and I don't know that I get this one. So, yes, he gets to bypass this primary, but we're still going to have really strong candidates on the Democratic side. People who.
But he'll only have to face one of them.
well, sure. I mean, and that's great if he wants to make it to the general election, but maybe not if he wants to win a three-way race in the general election. There is not a lot of evidence to suggest that there's a bunch of Republicans out there ready to cross the aisle to go for this no-nonsense guy, especially when he's been Southeast Michigan's most prominent Democrat for the last 40 years. So if it's the goal is to get to the general election, I think it's a great plan. If it's a goal to win a three-way general election, I would never count Mike Duggan out, because he is very good at things. But I don't know that I get this one, and if I'm John James right now, I'm super thinking about running.
Oh, interesting.
It's very much on brand, if you ask me. I mean, I think this is a guy who reads the situation and understands that both parties have fever wings, and he doesn't necessarily think that either one of those is good. Number two, got great support in the business community, and Bill Ford issued a statement within minutes of him announcing it. And I think that's a harbinger of things to come. I think the business community will very much coalesce. Both the center-right and the center-left business community, foundation community, others will coalesce behind him. And I think it could be very interesting. I mean, this is a guy who, in his early days as mayor, coming out of the bankruptcy, I think he was a very non-traditional Democrat. Just like Rick Snyder was a very non-traditional Republican. And I think one of the stories of the success, I know you talked to Judge Rosen of the bankruptcy, has been that you had political leaders who did not play to type. And I think Mike Duggan's one of those.
But when Rick Snyder ran, and he talked about whether or not he wanted to run as a Democrat or a Republican, he ran as a Republican, and Democrats crossed the aisle to vote for him.
You're having a hard time seeing it working in reverse?
Ask the No Labels Party how that worked out.
That's fair.
Ask any of the other folks who thought that they were going to woo sort of traditionally conservative Republicans from the Trump side to come vote for more moderate candidates. It just, where's the evidence that that's a thing that happens?
But Dennis, I think what Mike Duggan spoke about the other day, and what he sees though is this disgust with the whole system, that it's not just the purple in the middle that is really frustrated with both parties, that it's members of both parties, and then he expects to, but to Nancy's point, can he draw any Republicans over?
Yeah, well, I mean, also think of it in this context. You're going to have divided government in Lansing for the next 2 years. And so they very well may be making the argument that two parties can't get along. He's going to argue that he can step in as an independent, bring Republicans and Democrats together to pass a governing agenda. And again, if we look at the turnout, what we received in the last gubernatorial election, about 4.4 million people turned out. If you take the 37, 34, 30 strategy, you want to be the candidate that wins with 37%, you're looking at about 1.6 million votes. Can Mike Duggan find those 1.6 million votes between Republicans, Democrats, and independents in a year where, again, if the Republicans in Congress don't deliver and people are frustrated, government in Lansing is only able to pass a budget and everything else is contentious, can he use that to springboard his candidacy?
And I think that's going to be interesting because then it buys him time to be able to do what he said he did in Detroit when he was running, going and visiting 1,000 living rooms and sitting and talking to people about what they directly want to have done for them, not exactly what party is going to do here and there.
But I find myself wondering what the state's leading Democrats are going to do here. Those that have supported Mike Duggan all this time, can I see them passing on Jocelyn Benson, Pete Buttigieg, pick your Democratic candidate on the ballot, and crossing over and voting for the independent? I think it leaves them with a real conundrum.
I don't think it leaves them with a conundrum. I mean, I can't imagine the leading Democrats, because the Democratic primary is going to have Titans in it. It's going to have Jocelyn Benson, probably. I mean, I can't speak for the Secretary of State, but the people we all believe to be interested are Pete Buttigieg, Jocelyn Benson, Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist. These are very capable, prominent people who have serious credibility. So it's not like there's going to be Mike Duggan, a Republican, and then nothing on the Democratic side. There's going to be a very strong Democratic candidate. And again, I don't think this is a conundrum for Democratic leaders at all.
Detroit Democrats will have a problem not supporting.
We're a straight ticket kind of town, right? Like, I mean, how did it work for Chief Craig?
Part of his strategy is to allow people to go vote straight ticket as long as they vote for him as an independent for governor, and that vote for him as governor would count. I think he's counting on the Republicans going right, the Democrats going left with their nominee, and too far left for this state. And we saw how that happened, how that worked out in the presidential. So again, he is going to aim for that center lane, and depending on how politics plays out over these next 2 years, there may be an appetite for it.
Mike Duggan is excellent at things. And if anyone could do this, I would say it would be him. And I am not generally historically going to bet against Mike Duggan or count him out, but I think this is a really heavy lift.
And the Detroit narrative you're seeing crystallized by the Lions, by other things, that's going to help.
Yeah, I love this juicy steak of an issue. This is such a good one.
Except for that there's so many people in the suburbs who all they still, in outstate, who all they still think about when they hear about Detroit, despite the draft, despite the Lions, despite the train station, is they think it's crime and dysfunction. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Two other things I wanted to make sure we get to for the journalists among us here at this table. We complain constantly about the problems with ethics and transparency laws. Every candidate seems to promise them, Christy, and so far in this lame duck, it's landing with a thud.
Well, lame duck, I'm just going to say, first off, I think people hate lame duck, number one, because they say, well, how come you didn't get this done before the last 2 weeks of the session? What are you doing up there anyway? So it does really nothing for any Michigan citizen in terms of saying, oh, I really trust my government. I'm feeling really good about it, number one. So that's my lame duck rant. Now I'm going to get off the box. But number two, it always seems to get lost in the shuffle, right? And so it's like, yeah, I think we'll definitely tackle that, but it keeps getting pushed and pushed and pushed, and especially when both sides are benefiting from this one.
It's very frustrating, Daniel. We can't even FOIA. We still can't FOIA the governor's office.
It's our new state motto: we're the worst when it comes to transparency.
If you seek the worst peninsula.
Yeah. Bingo.
Oh, Nancy, get that on the agenda for 25.
It's just pathetic. It's pathetic. And particularly when you have Democrats in control and ceding to Republicans, you could leave this with them and say, this is what now you have to live under this. We didn't have to, now you do. And even that isn't enough to get it done.
Well, Dennis, I fear this is an issue without a constituency other than people like us.
Absolutely. And again, the politicians benefit from it, so why change a system that you benefit from?
In fact, the Detroit News has really done a drill down. Craig Mauger's done some great stuff on the we're talking so much dark money that is untraceable.
Yep.
And it's in the system. All right. There's my rant. I wanted to ask you, Daniel, as a business columnist and reporter, about what's going on at Stellantis. This warfare between the UAW and Stellantis was already interesting enough. Carlos Tavares is now out. I'll leave it to you whether he was resigning or...
Oh, I think it's pretty clear.
It's pretty clear because he was supposed to be out later in the year anyway, and now he's suddenly out.
He took on the key constituencies that you do at your peril. He alienated the U.S. dealer body, and this is the money engine of Stellantis globally. Alienated the UAW, went through executives like most people go through undershirts. I mean, it was constant churn. Raised the idea of potentially selling the Auburn Hills headquarters, which in this town makes people really squirrely. And I think the board just lost faith in his strategic direction. They wanted a more balanced approach between gas vehicles and EVs. He kept wanting to invest in EVs. A lot of people in Europe are asking for a pullback of the emissions targets because I don't know if people have been paying attention, but the German automakers right now are on their knees. It's the worst situation in decades.
John McElroy has convinced me to think now of the big three as General Motors, Ford, and Tesla. And I do find myself wondering what kind of presence Stellantis really wants in America now.
Well, this is where they make a lot of their money. So, I mean, you could say we're going to sell it to whoever, but at the end of the day, this is the engine, and that's why Carlos Tavares is on the outside looking in, is because he screwed up things in the United States.
Nancy, what do you suppose is happening with the Rensen, speaking of autos?
Well,
now that we've got GM promising they're going to, if the state will simply give them some money to tear this down, they'll backfill some education priorities.
Just find $250 million in the sofa cushions doing lame duck. No, I mean,
don't get me started.
The metro area is sort of littered with the wrecks of automotive companies that pulled out of a community, out of a building, and left it there. I guess it's good that they're trying to address that. I don't really see the case for a big public subsidy here, even if there is an education donation.
And that's your 2025
fight. Without
yeah.
public subsidies.
That's how it seems to be, no doubt about it. I got to get to a break, but I really wanted to have you all on one of my last programs. You guys have been such an important component of this, and you will be back with me again next week. So thanks very much for being here, gang.
Thank you, Dan.
We'll take a break. Gerald Rosen coming up on his new book that Daniel mentioned earlier, next on Flashpoint. If, like me, you like to give books during the holiday season and you have a tried and true Detroiter on your list, you might want to consider The Grand Bargain, the new book from Judge Gerald Rosen, and Judge Rosen is here to talk about it. Judge, good to have you on the program.
It's great to be back with you.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
This took a ton of work. In fact, it was actually 10 years in the making, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
Before we get to the details of the book, we are now a little more than a decade removed from the bankruptcy. What are the first things that you reflect on as you look back on that time?
How far Detroit has come in such a relatively short period of time. It is remarkable. You're a Detroiter. Yeah. I'm a Detroiter. And I can't remember a time in our history, in my lifetime, in which Detroit has been so ascendant. Yeah. You know, I was growing up in the 50s here, and it was at the top of its game. But soon after, the decline started, and now look where we are.
And how much did getting through the bankruptcy finally unshackle all of that that was waiting to happen?
Devin, I think we provided the foundation and the kind of the infrastructure and to move the city forward, and Mike Duggan took it from there.
Yeah. I know every time I talk about the Grand Bargain on this program, going all the way back to those 10 years, I hear from Detroit retirees very upset that I suggest that this fixed everything, because it was not without pain. But I'd like you to describe for me how much worse it could have been had the Grand Bargain not been achieved.
Well, I think I can summarize it by saying we brought $830 million into the bankruptcy in new money that would not have been there but for the Grand Bargain, gave it all to the retirees. And with that money, we bought a 10-year holiday for the city in pension contributions. And the city was able, we were able to get our deals in the bankruptcy. We were able to take that money and to get a fully consensual plan, deals with all of the city's creditors. So Detroit had a clean balance sheet at the end of it, and very, very different, very different.
It's clearly not without pain, of course, but yes, when you talk about this kind of money, it would have been something.
I think it has to be remembered that Kevin Orr was proposing 35 to 45% cuts to the pensions.
Exactly.
And in the end, the uniforms, the police and firefighters didn't take any cuts. They took a 50% cut to their COLA, and the civilians took a 4.5% cut and a cut to their COLAs, but it would have been so much worse, devastating.
I have since, for those 10 years, I've referred to Detroit being the city that was saved by its art. After looking through your book, I'm more convinced of that than ever. Is that a fair way of putting it?
That's a fair way to think about it.
Yeah.
But also, more than the art, it was the art and the people who believed in the city. You know, I think one of the hallmarks that we see in Detroit, and I'm sure you've seen this in your time here, is the grit and resilience that we have. We're seeing it at Ford Field.
That's exactly
last
right.
night.
Yes, sir.
But I think the bankruptcy is also a very, very good example of that, Devin.
One of the stories that I had never heard was when it first started to come to light. You had put together the Grand Bargain on that now famous napkin, the sketching of it.
Hanging in the DIA.
Hanging at the DIA. It is a piece of art in a way. Yeah. But David Shepardson, now with Reuters, but at the time was with the Detroit News, terrific reporter, one of my favorites.
And a good friend.
And a friend of yours. In fact, you presided over his wedding.
I did.
But he called you and he had gotten word of what was going to happen, and you thought that there was a chance that it was all about to crater.
I did.
If it got out.
I thought it was a near-death experience because I had just kind of thrown out the idea of the Grand Bargain, you know, the three-legged stool, the state, the foundations, and the DIA itself. Right. And I was very concerned that it would die a borning if all the various interest groups got early wind of this, and especially the bond creditors, because I was taking the only asset the city had, the art, and monetizing it all for one creditor, the retirees.
Darren Walker of the Ford Foundation, though, you were also worried about what his reaction was going to be. He actually thought it might help. The bond creditors didn't think it was very helpful when the word got out.
To say the least. You know, Darren thought it would, I think his words were, it will help forward the conversation. And it really did. Yeah. The bond creditors, who I saw right after I had breakfast with Darren in New York, I walked over and met with all the bond creditors. They thought it was a terrible idea, and they were quite upset about it. And one of them told me, this will never stand. So.
Well, which takes us back then to the guidance of your fellow judge, Stephen Rhodes, who oversaw the bankruptcy itself. He was a huge piece of this, wasn't he?
You know, Steve presided so immaculately over that case. We've all seen cases that have kind of gotten away from the judge, and even gotten away from the lawyers. Steve kept those trains running on time, right down the track. And we were actually a partnership. And at the very beginning, we met after I agreed to be the mediator, which itself was unusual. And we agreed on so many things, but one of which was time was Detroit's enemy. We didn't have time. And had Detroit been embroiled in litigation, trench warfare litigation, for years and years, Devin, there would have been nothing left of Detroit but dust and legal bills.
Which is what we feared, right? I mean, nobody thought that this would happen nearly as quickly as it did, but the worst case scenario was nuclear.
16 months, and people, that sounds like a long time to people, but in the municipal bankruptcy world, it's warp speed.
Yeah.
And every municipality that was in bankruptcy when we started was still in bankruptcy when we finished, and many of them for long periods of time afterward.
Your book is full of heroes.
It is. And heroines.
Heroines, yes, exactly. And a few villains as well. But I'm really curious whether you think that Detroit was able, my last question, whether Detroit is a model that anybody else could follow, or is this so unique to the city because of its art, because of the foundations, because of the relationship at the time with the way it worked in Lansing? Is it just, is this, can you sort of duplicate this? Is it duplicable?
You know, I think every city is unique, but within the city and its people, they have their own grand bargain. But the one thing that we had was will, political will and determination to see this through. It started with Rick Snyder, who made a very courageous, visionary decision to put the city into bankruptcy after his predecessors had swept the problems under the rug, pushed them down the road. But you have to have political will. And any city can have political will. It's not easy to do what Rick did. But any city can have political will. The solutions are there.
It really is a riveting story of the way this all came together.
My publisher would kill me if I didn't tell him.
I'm going to mention it's Our Media. Our Media is the publisher, and
the website is grandbargainbook, all one word.com. Grand Bargain Book. It's also on Amazon.
I'm glad you got it in. Judge Rosen.
My publisher would have killed me.
I understand. I know how that goes. I've got a relationship like that too. Thanks so much for being here.
Devin, it's great to see you, and best of luck to you in everything.
Thank you.
You're a legend, and I don't know how we're going to do it without you.
Thank you, Judge. We'll wrap things up for Flashpoint right after this. Don't go away. That's really kind. Thanks. Just like that, once again, we are out of time. Thanks so much for being here. Meet the Press is coming up next. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time right back here for Flashpoint.